We have about 11 years, if not less, before elephants will go extinct, so I had to work quite quickly.
Hi, I'm Michael Moynihan, and welcome to Vice Meets. This week we have two guests, Kathryn Bigelow, the Academy Award-winning director of The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, among many other films, and Scott Z. Burns, also a writer and producer of films like Contagion and An Inconvenient Truth. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Today, we're here to talk about something rather different for both of you, a film that is online and people can watch this called Last Days, and it is a 3-minute film. Tell us the sort of premise of it and how this came to fruition.
Well, it came out of many conversations, many with Scott, and an interest that I had in working in the space, not just of philanthropy, but animal advocacy, and realizing that there was a connection between the poaching of elephants and terrorism. And when I sort of stumbled on that nexus, I thought at first it might make an interesting feature film, but then I realized that we have about 11 years, if not less, before elephants will go extinct, so I had to work quite quickly.
So literally the reason you make a 3-minute film is because of the urgency of the situation. And if you're going out and getting funding and actually casting
and rehearsing,
you're wasting
right.
time. That's how you're looking at this.
Given, one elephant is killed every 15 minutes. So when we're having this conversation, there's another elephant that's going.
4 years ago, 35% of all the elephants that died were being killed for their ivory. In 2012, over 80% that died were killed illegally for their ivory.
So it's a very tragic situation, and we're not going to have any left in the wild in a decade.
And Scott, your involvement in this project, you wrote this film. There's a sort of text on the screen that kind of explains the premise of the film and why we should be worried. What was your interest in this subject?
Well, some of my interests parallel Kathryn's. When we started talking about it, I said, you're right, there's no way this movie's getting made anytime soon, and if it's getting made at all. And the issue requires more urgent action. And also just the whole politics of Hollywood. I think I was a little bit skeptical that people were really going to put forth what needed to be said and done.
For those of us who are sort of blissfully outside the Hollywood system, what are the politics of Hollywood? Is it sort of cynical about this stuff? I
don't know that it's necessarily
concern?
Cynical, but it's not as though Hollywood is always eager to make, incredibly dark, truthful, complicated, stories. And this is a really complicated story.
Mm. So basically what you're doing is going for emotion, correct?
Emotion, and also it's animated. That had a lot to do with reaching a broad audience, but at the same time it would be impossible for me to sit in the cutting room day after day after day and look at an animal suffering in live action footage. So that is what precipitated it being animated, and it's very graphic. And actually, Scott brought up the point the other day that there's graphic images of elephant poaching all over the internet, and it hasn't stopped anything. And so, it's a way of trying to create a messaging medium that is incredibly accessible.
There's graphic images, not of animals being killed in this film, but of people being killed. And
well,
the Westgate
that's the part
Mall.
that's not animated.
Yeah, so we go, and explain that, we go from animation to essentially like security camera footage
Correct.
From the Westgate Mall.
Correct.
Explain what that is and why it's relevant to the film and to poaching.
Well, in September 21st, 2012, Al-Shabaab, who claimed responsibility for the attack, entered the Westgate Mall at about 11:30 in the morning and killed 67 people, wounded about 170. And there is a tremendous amount of evidence that links that attack and the funding of that organization through poaching. In other words, they'll poach the elephants, secure the tusks, sell the tusks, and fund their organization, because they have about a 5,000 strong army that all have to be paid. The thing that's interesting, I think, from the standpoint of the messaging that we created around this piece, is that this is terrorism that you can do something about, that any of us can do something about. We can not buy ivory trinkets. We can hopefully impress upon others that it's not just the blood on your hands of the elephant, it's the blood on your hands of innocent people that are caught in these, terrorist attacks. And it's not just al-Shabaab. I mean, there's also evidence of Lord's Resistance, of Boko Haram, of Janjaweed. So you're actually limiting the revenue stream to these organizations by curbing the demand for ivory. And I sort of look at elephants now as sort of ATM machines for terrorist groups that are rising across Africa. So it's in the interest of national security, not just elephant preservation, to try to curb that demand.
I've never even seen, I don't think, a trinket made of ivory. Maybe I have and just haven't noticed it. So if I'm not buying things like this in general, and I watch this film and I say, this is a pretty serious issue. Whether or not terrorism is involved, I don't want to see the extinction of wild elephants in Africa. What do I do?
There are a lot of things that you can do. I mean, first of all, a lot of times people don't know if they're buying something made of ivory or what's being sold. But, New York City, this isn't just a problem in China or in Southeast Asia. New York City is actually one of the leading markets for ivory as well.
What would these be? What sort of products would these be?
It can be chopsticks like they are in the movie. It can be a little pin. Sometimes they're actually little elephants that are carved out of ivory.
Apparently in the jewelry district, in some of the stores, literally on the counters, not even hidden, there's tables of ivory trinkets.
Are these, is that illegal? I mean, what is the legal regime that governs that?
That's
if you
the
go
gray
into a store
area.
and you see this ivory, do you say, this is probably dodgy stuff, I should, call the cops? I mean, that's not going to do anything right. I mean, is it actually illegal?
Well, we would like people to be able to call the cops, and we would like for people to be able to talk to, the people here in New York who deal with an incredible amount of animal-related products that come into this country through the ports here, and it's grossly, woefully understaffed. There are just, I can't remember what we were told the amount of cargo.
Cargo, but only 3 enforcements that are tasked with all of Manhattan and all of the boroughs.
There's 3 officers who are trying to police all of this. And
particularly for ivory, or just in general?
Everything.
No, everything, wildlife trafficking.
Okay.
One of the things that, you can do is to,
4 people.
Yeah.
3 investigators and 1 assistant district attorney whose sort of area of focus is this.
And as a sort of basis for comparison in, sort of terrorism-related things, I mean, checking ports, I mean, that's a huge number, right? So this is kind of getting a tiny, tiny bit of attention. What was the reason that you guys said, even if there are some skeptics out there, that you said this will be the angle that we take on this film, is to talk about terrorism?
Well, it was certainly is an underreported angle, and it also, in the space of conservation, that is fairly well saturated. And then when this information came to light, like through the EAL, for instance, the Elephant Action League, then it became another tactic. I know I spoke with an assistant district attorney in New York, and she said that it was very difficult for her to get traction among her colleagues just on the elephant conservation or animal conservation side. The minute the terrorism entered the conversation, she got traction. So it encourages traction, sadly, and also the number of elephants being killed spiked enormously with the rise of the militias. I mean, the Shabaab, I believe, has only been in existence since 2007, 8, or in that area, and all of a sudden the elephant killing, poaching has spiked enormously. For instance, there was cyanide put in a watering hole in 2013 where elephants, a lot of animals were killed. But in other words, it's spiked radically and tragically.
Cyanide is put into
a watering hole.
Poachers did that to make it easier to collect tusks.
And so it's not just sort of going around shooting
Well, it's that
too,
as well. But in other words, it's getting kind of what has been called industrialized poaching.
I mean, in some
went
sense,
from
it's more sophisticated now than it's been
It's
in the
more
past,
sophisticated, yeah. The poachers have night vision goggles. They have 50 caliber weapons, and some of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
And the tragic thing is people are under the misapprehension that tusks are like milk teeth and they fall out and then another one grows. No, in fact, the elephant is killed, sometimes not even fully dead, and then they have to hack the faces off to remove the tusks. So it's it's hideous from every angle that you look at it, and not to mention the terrorist angle, but extinction.
And it is one of these, rare times, like you pointed out, where, national security and, the security of our natural world are exactly running parallel. And so I think that also drew this, to us. And it's not going away. I mean, I think people have some notion, but it's actually increasing. Interpol, found more illegal ivory last year than they had in quite some time. And as China becomes more affluent and there are more buyers, that becomes a bigger problem. So I think building awareness across the world is really what we need to do here.
No, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think people miss the point a lot when you have these signs that say, "Bring back our girls." And say, well, the internet can't bring them back. Twitter cannot bring them back. But everybody I know actually knows about what's happening in the Horn of Africa now, which I find utterly fascinating. The same thing with Joseph Kony. And that's kind of what you guys are hoping to do, is actually just make this exist as an issue. Because for most people, I mean, I follow the news, wasn't really an issue to me. I didn't know too much about it. I mean, that's sort of the goal, right?
To add on to that, I mean, an elephant tusk is worth something like maybe 1,300 British pounds sterling a kilo.
Per kilo.
Per kilo. But an elephant alive in a tourist-like reserve can be worth as much as $1 million in terms of an attraction and a draw. And so it's far more, I mean, not just the conservation and preservation aspect, but they're far more valuable, obviously, alive than dead.
Which again is something that someone can take direct action and write to those countries and to their tourism boards saying, please, save your elephants, root out corruption within your country, do the things that, that they need to do, because it has to happen everywhere.
Is the goal to reduce all consumption, or is there a legitimate amount? I mean, can ivory be harvested, used? Are there proper uses? Is there a proper way of getting it? Or would you
I think it's across the board.
Across the board.
Because we're at a point where you've got maybe 10 years left of elephants in the wild, and that's a fairly conservative number. I mean, there are areas where they don't longer exist. So, I mean, I think it has to be eradicated across the board.
And there are challenges beyond that. I mean, if you think about this in the logical extrapolation, why does this have value? Well, it has value because people see it in museums and it's sold at auction. And so one of the things eventually that I think we have to start looking at is how can we rein in our worship of ivory in those sorts of situations. And that's going to be a more complicated thing, because you can see how this spreads out into other businesses.
And what that would do would be to stigmatize ivory.
Shame.
Yeah. I mean, if you would look at it in association with these horrible faceless carcasses of these gorgeous, gorgeous big animals that are going to disappear.
So some sort of legal sanction and, mixed with shaming people
exactly.
into stopping doing this. In a place like China, which, it's an emerging market, people have much more spending power than they've ever had in the past. And this is a growing market there. What is it in China? What is it being used for?
In the case of ivory, I think in my understanding, it's trinket alone. And it's abhorrent.
So, I mean, it's changing cultural norms too, which is very, very difficult, right? I mean, if they're, traditional uses in China, how do you change that?
Well, I think they're trying. I mean, Yao Ming has done a lot of really amazing work.
The basketball player.
Yeah, tremendous work.
小象失去了母亲，甚至整个家族，最终沦为孤儿。不要让非法象牙贸易把更多的小象变成孤儿。请对象牙制品说不。
And I think there is an awareness there that, but you're right, it's hard to change any sort of thing. I mean, the Chinese have drank wine made of tiger bones, and so they've had challenges with tigers and the extinction of tigers. But, the elephant problem is really, I think, one that we can focus on right now, because if you are a person, anywhere in the world, and you're buying this and you think about this little trinket and what it means to you as a status symbol, and then you think about your role as a citizen in the world and you go backwards and just follow connect the dots, that's something that we're trying to make really easy for people.
Yeah, in the movie it's really, not only the trail of money, but the trail of blood, and really look at that. But I think it could be ultimately, kind of a question of maybe it's generational, and maybe it, I have tremendous faith in a younger generation seizing the moment and wanting to, own the preservation of these beautiful animals.
I have no faith in young people, by the way. Don't trust them.
All right.
We'll go through the legal system here.
But what you even said at the beginning, I think, is sort of really an important thing, which is, it would be really great if we could look at these animals and appreciate their beauty and educate people so that they know that elephants are extraordinary, feeling, complicated social animals, there was that great book that came out years ago, When Elephants Weep, that I remember reading and really changed my perception on, on what an elephant is.
Well, thank you both so much, Kathryn, Scott, and I hope that you make some forward progress in here, and everyone should watch this film. It'll take 3 minutes of your time. And what is the website, so we all know?
lastdaysofivory.com.
And that will also tell you how to beat these bastards and start correcting this problem.